Oi, what's up, everybody? I see Smooth Jimmy on the screen. Cigar lock of the week, looking dapper. He's ready to go. I'm ready to go. You know what that means. Time for another episode of Balls Deep Breakdown with me, your host, Uncle Weezy. We are going to get balls deep into these stats today and talk about a very intriguing UFC Vegas 31 matchup between Khalid Taha and Sergey Morozov. This is going to be a very interesting fight. We got a couple of bantamweights here. We got a couple of pretty experienced guys. And it's one of the closer line fights on this card. So I think it's kind of important to get into all the tape here and all the numbers that we have available to us. And let's get into it. But before we do, let's get into the chat here. We got my man Robbie. Let's go, Uncle Weezy. Time to make that dough. We got to work hard if we're going to make that dough. We got to work hard if we're going to beat these bookies, man. So, yeah, dude, let's work hard. Let's get into all these numbers. Let's get into both of their histories, figure out some angles on this fight. It's an intriguing fight. We got Dave showing up. My man Dave, what's up? He's always giving us some really good information in the Discord for DFS by the numbers. What's up, Dave? Let's see what you got for us here, Weezy. I'm about to show you what I got for y'all. I got a whole pile of stats here. I've watched basically all the available tape on Taha. I've watched a good 7 or 8 fights from Sergey Morozov. So let's get into the numbers. Let's see what I got for you guys and start, like we always do, with the tail of the tape. So we got Sergey Morozov here is 32 years old. He is the older fighter. Khalid Taha, 29. Sergey Morozov's got a 1-inch height advantage, and we got Taha with a 2-inch reach advantage. Both of these guys are orthodox fighters. We got Khalid Taha training out of Arena Dortmund in Germany, and Sergey Morozov was fighting out of Erkin Kush in Kazakhstan. But he is now, I'm hearing, fighting at American Top Team and training there for this fight. So that is a step up from Erkin Kush. But even at Erkin Kush, they got some Kazakh killers in that camp, one of them being Zhalgas Zhumagulov. So both of these guys have quite a bit of experience on the European regional scene prior to coming to the UFC. For Khalid Taha, most of his fights were coming in Germany. And for Sergey Morozov, he was fighting in M1 mostly. Both pretty experienced fighters here, as we can see. We got Morozov, 21 professional fights. Khalid Taha with 17. Taha's got a 13-3 record with 1 no contest. And Sergey Morozov is 16-5. We got Morozov with about 60 more minutes of cage time, and in addition to those 4 additional pro fights here. If we look at the average fight time, we see that Sergey Morozov spends a little more time per fight in the cage at 8.33 average minutes. And for Taha, it's 6.65. We have got Khalid Taha's pro mixed martial arts career being 8 years, 3 months. And Sergey Morozov, a 5-year advantage there, as he's been fighting professionally for 13 years. So it looks like Morozov's been fighting since he was 18 or 19 years old. And for Taha, it's almost the same thing as it looks like he's been fighting since he was 20 or 21. If we get into the UFC experience here, we do see that Khalid Taha has spent a little more of his time, a little more of his career fighting at the highest level of the UFC, as he's got 4 UFC fights in comparison to 1 for Morozov. Khalid Taha is 1-2 with a no contest. That no contest was a win over Bruno Silva, who is a natural 125-pounder that was turned to a no contest after Khalid Taha did win that fight in the 3rd round with an arm triangle choke. However, he popped for performance-enhancing drugs, so that was overturned to a no contest. So had he not been on the juice, he'd be a 2-2 fighter. We see the cage time here. Obviously, Taha, 43 minutes to 8 for Morozov, so a significant advantage in UFC cage time and UFC experience for Taha. And we look at the average fight time, about 11 minutes for Taha, almost 9 for Morozov. Let's look at the chat here and see what we got here. We got Kyle in the room. Didn't know you had your own channel. Subscribe. Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've had my own channel, but not for very long. I'm kind of new to the YouTube game and to the content creation game, but I'm not new to UFC statistics, as I've been keeping my own database now. I started about a little over a year ago. So I've got over 550 fighters in my 2020 and 2021 databases combined. So this is something I'm not new to, but I am new to providing content for you guys on YouTube. So I appreciate each and every one of you guys that comes out to hang out with me here, especially when I'm doing my live balls deep breakdowns. We got Bailey in the room here. Love the breakdown and content, Uncle Weezy. Bailey, I love you hanging out with us. I appreciate it. And we got Dave stepping in to say Weezy is truly the king of MMA stats. That is a very, very high compliment. I appreciate that, Dave. I'm here to share them with you guys. I find statistics to be incredibly helpful in my analysis of UFC fights, and I like to share them with you guys because that's what family does for each other. And your Uncle Weezy, when it comes to the MMA stats, man, he's got your back. But let's get into the finish stats here. We want to see how these guys win fights. And let's look here. We got for Khalid Taha in his overall career, so that's the 13 wins, 3 losses, and a no contest. He's got 15% of his wins are by submission and 69% by knockout. So this guy is a prolific finisher, 84% career finish rate, most of them by knockout. Khalid Taha's got a ton of power in his hands. He's built like a fire hydrant. The dude is all muscle. And when he throws, he does not throw to kind of touch you and point fight you. He throws every time to put you on a stretcher. So the guy's got serious power. The finish stats absolutely show it. And in that one UFC win, he did win it by knockout. It was a win in less than 30 seconds over Boston Salmon. And if you go back and you watch that performance, there are 2 amazing things about that performance. One, the punch that Taha landed in order to knock him out. And then 2, Boston Salmon coming into that fight with maybe the worst fucking haircut I have ever seen, dude. Sometimes, you know, it's nice to see somebody get knocked out and slept that bad because, you know, maybe it'll wake him up and maybe his brain got scrambled into a place where he can get a decent fucking haircut. But anyway, Taha, tons of power. What we're not seeing in that UFC finish is the finish that he had over Bruno Silva that was overturned to a no contest. So he has won by submission as well, but that was overturned. So Khalid Taha does have a wrestling background. He does have a decent ground game here. So we don't want to overlook that. As far as Morozov, we've got 16 professional wins. 8 of them have come by knockout, and it looks like 3 of them have come by submission. So 11 of his 16 wins have come by finish. So Morozov also a pretty good finisher, not quite up at Taha's level, but he's only had 1 fight, so he's never finished any UFC wins because he doesn't have any UFC wins. And he was finished by submission in his only UFC performance by Umar Nurmagomedov. So we can forgive him for that. That guy, Umar, is going to be a beast. We see the Khalid Taha in his UFC losses. There are 2 of them. He has never been finished. But in his only loss that came outside of the UFC, he was finished, and that was by submission. So 1 of his 3 career losses has come by submission. And if we look at Sergey Morozov here, we see that 3 of his 5 career losses have come by sub and 1 by knockout. So Sergey Morozov has lost 4 of his career 5 wins. He has been finished inside the distance. So that's something we do need to keep an eye on. Let's get into the striking statistics here. And look and see what we got. Now, we have to keep in mind here, unfortunately, we've only got a 1-fight sample size for Morozov, and he got murdered in that fight. Or, you know, Nurmagomedov pretty much won that fight from pillar to post. So we see that Sergey Morozov in his 1 fight landed 7 out of 30 significant strike attempts. He's landing 0.81 significant strikes per minute out of 3.47 offered for a 23.33% accuracy. Not a great showing in his UFC debut. Khalid Taha, 2.86 significant strikes landed out of 8.11 offered for a 35% striking accuracy, showing a lot of power, though. That is one thing that we talked about already. Khalid Taha, built like a fire hydrant. He throws with bad intentions, and he's got serious power. 1.6% of his significant strikes landed in the UFC have resulted in a knockdown. He does have 2 knockdowns in the UFC, one against Bruno Silva and one against Boston Salmon. 0.69 knockdowns per 15 minutes, while Morozov doesn't have any knockdowns in his one UFC fight. If we look at the overall defensive numbers here for Taha, 4.26 significant strikes landed out of 7.51 offered. So he is getting landed on a significant amount more than he is landing, as we see Taha landing 2.86 and absorbing 4.26. So we got a 43.25% striking defense here for Taha. That is not impressive, but in the small sample size for Morozov, even less impressive is getting out ratioed by almost 3 to 1, or actually almost 4 to 1, 3.5 to 1, as he's only landing to 8.81, but absorbing 2.89. So a negative 2.08 significant strike difference here for Morozov in the one fight that he had. 39% striking defense, even lower percentage than Taha. But like we say, very small sample size. We can't get too out over our skis and say that Morozov isn't worthy of being in this matchup, because when we get to the strength of schedule, we'll talk about who these guys have fought, because we're going to have to really look at Morozov's experience before the UFC, because we only have 8 minutes of UFC tape on him, and it was against the guy that might very well be a future champion at 135 pounds. So let's get into the grappling stats here, because this is going to be kind of interesting. If we look at the offensive grappling stats that are down here at the bottom left of the screen, we've got Khalid Taha has only attempted 2 takedowns in his 4 UFC fights. He has not gotten any of them, so he's a 0% takedown percentage. Morozov did not attempt any takedowns in his fight against Umar. So neither one of these guys have any takedowns per 15 minutes. Khalid Taha is attempting 0.35 submission attempts per 15 minutes, and he has 10.4% control time, while Morozov has 1.54% control time. Excuse me. All right, let's get into the defensive grappling stats here, because these are important. Because in my opinion, we need to really look at Sergey Morozov's ability to grapple here, because we see that Khalid Taha has been taken down 10 times and has had 26 takedown attempts against him in his 4 UFC fights. And one of those UFC fights lasted less than 30 seconds. So let's throw out the Boston Salmon fight and say that in 3 UFC fights, this guy has had 26 takedowns attempted against him. So it's pretty clear strategically what Taha's opponents have tried to do is take this guy down, because standing in front of him, he does have a good chin, Khalid Taha. He took quite a few good shots from Hani Barcelos, and he's never been knocked down in his UFC career. So if you're going to stand and bang with Taha, you're going to have a very hard time knocking him out, and you're going to be seriously playing with fire the entire time, because the dude throws with serious bad intentions. So we know that his opponents have recognized that, as they are almost attempting 9 takedown attempts per fight against him. 3 fights, 26 takedown attempts, 10 takedowns. 61.54% takedown defense for Taha. So he is being taken down 3.45 times per 15 minutes, and he's being controlled 42.65% of his UFC career, while he's only controlling his opponents 10.4% of the time. So that's important. 53% of Khalid Taha's UFC fights are taking place in control time positions, and I think that's because his opponents are unwilling to stand and strike with him. Sergey Morozov is very good all around. I've watched a significant amount of tape on him. He does wrestle a lot, and he will go to his wrestling in this fight. I have no doubt about that. But he didn't show the wrestling in the first fight because he was fighting Nurmagomedov, and it's not like you're going to be able to take those guys down. His best chance of winning that fight against Nurmagomedov was to stand and strike with him. So we didn't see any takedown attempts, and Nurmagomedov chained together takedown attempts beautifully in that fight. He got 5 takedowns, but let's remember that Sergey Morozov that fight only lasted 8 minutes. So since you can only end up one round on top and end up on the fight on top, we know that he got up at least 3 times, Sergey Morozov. So even though he was being taken down by Nurmagomedov, he wasn't being controlled a significant amount of the fight, 34%. But that's with 11 takedowns in 8 minutes. So you could see that we could see that number could be higher if Morozov wasn't defending well. Anyway, Morozov in his pre-UFC tape, I see a lot of wrestling from him. I see a lot of good boxing, a lot of good kickboxing. He chains everything together very well. He is a very, very well-rounded mixed martial artist, and he has fought some seriously tough competition before the UFC. So unfortunately, we don't have enough meat on the bone of these grappling statistics to really look into it, because these guys only have 5 combined UFC fights. But what we do have meat on the bone is in the strength of schedule for Taha in the UFC and in all of their previous fights. So let's get into those strength of schedule statistics here. And before we do, let's see what the chat is up to. We got Bailey saying he really is. Weezy being the king of MMA stats is what Bailey's agreeing with Dan there. I appreciate that. You guys are too kind. Robbie saying he thinks he's siding on Sergey. Well, we're going to get into the strength of schedule stats here. And I think that's one place where we're going to sneakily kind of start to lean towards Morozov when we see who these guys have fought prior to their UFC fights. So anyway, let's get into these stats here. We've got Khalid Taha with a UFC strength of schedule of a 1.33 ratio. So the average Khalid Taha opponent is fairly inexperienced with 2 wins and 1.5 losses, 3.5 fights, 1.33. So Morozov doesn't have a ratio because his only opponent is Umar Nurmagomedov, who's only 1-0 in the UFC. So we can't compute a ratio when the denominator is 0. So we don't have anything here for Morozov. If we see that Khalid Taha, when he wins, his average, the average guy that he beats, and there's only one of them, has a 1-1 record in the UFC. So only 2 UFC fights, a 1 ratio, nothing impressive there. Khalid Taha's wins aren't anything that we're going to hang our hat on here. And as far as the losses for Taha, there have been 2 of them. The average record of the opponent that he's losing to has 2.5 wins and 1.5 losses for 4 total fights and a 1.67 ratio. So it's not like Taha's the guys that are beating Taha are absolute world beaters either. But there is one thing that we do need to look at. We'll see it here in the last 5. So these are Khalid Taha's 4 fights here. He debuted against Nad Narimani, but that fight took place at 145 pounds. It's very important that we acknowledge that, because Nad Narimani really big brothered him in that fight and wrestled the shit out of him. And Khalid Taha, coming up a weight class, wasn't able to deal with the offensive wrestling, the top game, and the control of Nad Narimani. So he lost a unanimous decision there. Boston Salmon, worst hair in the UFC in that performance, and I believe he was cut immediately afterwards. It could have been for the haircut just as much as for getting knocked out in the first 30 seconds. We got a no contest here against Bruno Silva, who came up a weight class to fight Khalid there at 135. So Bruno Silva, naturally being a 125er, took that fight on short notice. He wound up getting choked out in the end of the 3rd round, but Bruno Silva won the 2nd round of that fight with some wrestling and top control. And I think that that's going to be Morozov's path here, is to out-wrestle Khalid Taha, because even though Morozov is a good striker, very crisp, has a lot of weapons, throws a great 1-2, he's just a really good, well-rounded mixed martial artist. I believe if they stay on the feet, you're really going to see Morozov probably not be landing the more impressive strikes. It'll be Taha. He just throws with so much heat that it's going to be hard to picture him, Morozov, that is, landing the more impressive strikes while they're standing. So I think Morozov's path is going to be to use his wrestling. And then we had the unanimous decision loss against Ronnie Barcelos. And boy, did Taha show a chin and some toughness and some really good conditioning in that fight. One thing that I've seen after watching all the tape on Taha, in the fights where he did go to decision, I never really saw him get tired. He got as tired as anybody would after fighting for 15 minutes. But for a guy with that much muscle on his frame, I would expect him to gas out, to be a candidate to be gassing out. But the conditioning that I've seen out of Taha so far in the UFC has been very good. And even prior to UFC, he's doing a great job in terms of his conditioning. Now, if we go to the advanced stats here, we can see, let me zoom in on this a little bit so you guys can get a really good look. All right, that's a little too big. Let's go 125%. There we go. So here's Taha. We do see that the Nad Narimani loss came at 145 pounds. So a win over 1 and 2 Boston Salmon, but the one win for Salmon came on the Contender Series. And then 2 and 2 Bruno Solo was a no contest. And then his losses were to a 5 and 1 Hani Barcelos and a 2 and 2 Nad Narimani. But that was, like we said, was at 145 pounds. And we see here out of a 900-second fight, so that's a 3-round fight, full fight that went to decision. Nad Narimani controlled him on the ground for 2/3 of the time. And we'll also see that if we look at the defensive numbers here, we will see that Nad Narimani took him down 6 out of 11 times. So if we throw out the fight at featherweight, and we look at how he's done at 135 pounds, his takedown defense has been a little bit better. 4 out of 15, his opponents have been successful. So that's about a 70% takedown defense. So not bad after being in his natural weight class. And like I said, he can wrestle. Not much to look at here in terms of Morozov, because there was only the one fight. So this is the Tapology resume here of Khalid Taha. And we see that he's got the loss to Barcelos, the no contest to Silva, win over Salmon, loss over Narimani, a win in Brave via rear naked choke over Hamza Kuheji, who's got a really good record. He's got a 10-2 overall record fighting out of Bahrain. So a pretty good win there. A guy who's on a pretty good winning streak in Brave CF. And then we got a loss to Takafumi Otsuka. That was 2:23 left in round 3. I watched that fight. Taha was controlling most of that fight, but the place where Otsuka had success was with his offensive wrestling. That seems to be the hole that there is in the game for Taha, is if his opponent is committing to the wrestling and favoring position over submission and using some ground and pound, they can easily beat Taha. And this was a situation where Otsuka really wasn't doing great in the fight, but when he did shoot for takedowns, he was having success. So even prior to the UFC, I wasn't seeing the best takedown defense out of Taha. So, but if we go and we look at Morozov's career, I want to tell you about his last 2 losses. His last 2 losses are to Umar Nurmagomedov, who is undefeated, and to Movsar Evloev, who is also undefeated. Prior to that, you have to go back to the end of 2016 to find his last loss. That was to Josh Reddinghouse in M1. And Josh Reddinghouse is a good mixed martial artist in his own right. And he actually wound up avenging that loss prior to coming into the UFC with a unanimous decision win, a 5-round fight over Reddinghouse. So I want to call attention to a couple of things here that after the Evloev loss, which was a championship fight in M1, Evloev dominated with the wrestling, but still they went back and forth. If you watch how Morozov handles the wrestling against Evloev and against Umar Nurmagomedov, 2 of the most dominant bantamweight Russian wrestlers that we have in the division in the UFC right now. He can hang with these guys. Eventually, they're going to chain together enough takedown attempts in order to get him to the ground and get a dominant position. But it's not like this guy is a fish out of water against studs like Evloev and Umar Nurmagomedov. So I believe that Morozov has the chops to be able to wrestle with Taha, to use his offensive wrestling in order to be able to win rounds and potentially be the underdog winning this fight. So We do see the ability to finish here, as he's got a win over Fatah Yulatse here in 4:31 of round one. He's got a win over Bayer Steppen, who's fighting in Brave as well right now, another Central Asian regional scene guy. Another Central Asian regional scene guy in Ulu here. He knocked him out at the end of the first round. So we see that this guy can finish, and he finished with punches here in the fourth round, knocked this guy out, Osetrov. And that was for the vacant title after Evloev left M1. He vacated the title, and it was Morozov who beat Osetrov to be the M1 challenge bantamweight championship, and then he defended that championship against Reddinghouse, and then stepped up to fight Umar here in the UFC. So that's Morozov's history. His last two losses, the only fights he's lost after the year 2016, were to two of the best undefeated prospects right now in the UFC bantamweight division. So if we look at that strength of schedule, I am seeing an actual advantage for Morozov. I see a wrestling advantage for Morozov. The striking, the technical aspects of it, in terms of volume, accuracy, I would say that they're very close. But what separates Taha and Morozov is that power from Taha. So I could see this fight finishing inside the distance, but more on the Taha side than on the Morozov side, because Morozov has finished guys, but slightly lower level guys than Taha. So I am thinking that I am pretty close to this being a 50-50 fight. I might lean Taha, but with where the odds are on this fight right now, we can look here. If we go to best fight odds, we can see that the best odds that we're getting on Morozov, we are getting plus money. It's plus 135. And right now, Khalid Taha around minus 145. And if we see where the line's been going, he's been about, looks like he opened up at minus 150, got all the way up to about minus 170, and it looks like it's now there's some money coming in on Morozov here over the last day and a half. We went from minus 167 up to minus 157. So it looks like there is some money coming in on the dog Morozov here. The over-under, the under 2.5 rounds is plus 185, so the bookies definitely see this fight going to the decision. If we've got Taha inside the distance is plus 250, and Morozov inside the distance is plus 450. So the books agree with me that if we're going to see somebody finish inside the distance, it's more likely to be Taha than Morozov. But you never know. Morozov can get the job done with his grappling. And like I say, this guy can swim and has done pretty well with guys like Evloev and Nurmagomedov before finally being ground down. But I mean, that the same thing would happen to Taha. So yeah, I see this as being a very close fight, but there is something that we do need to talk about, and that's that Khalid Taha missed weight against Bruno Silva. So this guy is a guy who has been suspended before for using performance-enhancing drugs, and he has missed weight before. So before you want to bet on Khalid Taha, you definitely want to see this guy on the scale. So I would recommend that if you're on Morozov, you might want to, the line's already moving. You're going to want to keep your eye on it, because you might not be able to do much better than plus 130 at this point. But I do see why Taha's the favorite. He's the favorite because he's probably the better finisher here. He has finished more fights over his career. Also, because Morozov has been finished in 4 out of his 5 losses, while Khalid Taha has only been finished in 1 out of his 3 losses, and that was prior to the UFC. So I see this fight probably going to decision, because I think Morozov will be able to use his wrestling and top control successfully enough to be able to avoid a knockdown. But Morozov is very tough in his own right. So, yeah, that's about what I got for you guys here. Noah Allen saying that Taha versus Hani was pretty close. I saw Hani kind of dominating him there, but, right at the very end, Barcelos got a little bit tired, and Taha started coming back and putting it on him a little bit. But then in the last 30 seconds, Barcelos landed some huge shots. Barcelos looked so much bigger than Taha, too. It didn't even look like they were in the same weight class there. So that was interesting to see. But Barcelos is absolutely huge for a bantamweight, and he is a top level bantamweight in my opinion. So that was a very tough loss. Both of these guys have lost to some really good competition, and I've seen both of these guys beat some pretty good regional scene competition, but we haven't seen either one of these guys get what I would call a signature win yet. And I believe that this would be, whoever wins this fight, this is going to be the signature win of their career. And so this is a very big fight for both of these guys. I really liked what I saw out of Morozov's wrestling enough on the regional scene to probably, if I were to bet this fight, which I'm not running to the window to bet, believe me, I think this is lined quite correctly at this point. But I think I would take the dog money before I bet on Taha here. And if I wanted to hedge, I would just hedge with Taha inside the distance, because I think that's his best path here. But I could certainly see him winning a decision too if his defensive wrestling is good enough to stop some takedowns and not let Morozov accrue some control time here. So thank you guys for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. I know it's early. I had a request on Twitter to do the D-Rod Preston Parsons fight, and I find that to be a very interesting fight. So I'm going to do some tape study on Preston Parsons and have one more Balls Deep breakdown coming out for you this week. That'll be the fourth one, and it will be Preston Parsons versus D-Rod. I'm going to look to be doing that one probably either later on tonight or right when I wake up tomorrow morning. Thank you all for hanging out with me here on Balls Deep Breakdown. Keep an eye out for the next one. Follow me on Twitter at MMA Weezy. Check me out on Stat Diggers every Sunday night on Pub Sports Radio, 6:15 Central Time, 7:15 Eastern, where we go balls deep into all the fights for the upcoming card, and we get into all the stats and really kind of give you an early look before anybody else has content out on which way we're leaning and what research we've already done for you guys, that you can get a head start on your betting looks. You can obviously check me out right here on my YouTube channel, Uncle Weezy. And definitely Noah saying that, he definitely lost every round, but he didn't get dominated unlike Umar did. Yeah, that's for sure. I would agree. Umar did a much better job on Morozov than Barcelos did on Taha. And then we'll have to rewatch later. Yeah, absolutely, Noah. Yeah, thanks for hanging out with me, you guys. God bless all of you. I will catch you on the next Balls Deep Breakdown either later on tonight or tomorrow morning. And good luck on all your UFC Vegas 31 action. God bless. Talk to you guys soon.